Hi, my name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED, and this is Q5 Ham Radio. Today I'm joined by Nathaniel Frissell, W2NAF, the driving force behind HamSCI, the Ham Radio Science Citizen Investigation. Nathaniel and his team just wrapped up HamSCI's first ever multi-day field exercise hosted at K3LR in Pennsylvania. Over 4 days, students, professors, and volunteers installed key components of the personal space weather station, tested spectrum monitoring tools, and even got on the air to log hundreds of contacts. It was science in action, blending ham radio, ionospheric research, and the kind of hospitality Tim K3LR is known for. A special thanks to DX Engineering, whose support helps make projects like this and Q5 Ham Radio possible. Welcome, Nathaniel.
Hi, Kevin. How are you?
I am well. Thank you for joining me today. Let's start with HamSCI. Not everybody knows what the organization is. I know you've been around a while, and you've certainly gotten a lot of great publicity and doing a lot of great work. But start from the beginning. Why did you found this to start with?
I went to graduate school for ionospheric physics and electrical engineering at Virginia Tech. And the reason I went into that was because of my interest in amateur radio. So I became an amateur radio operator when I was in high school, about that age. And I just really got into it and eventually wanted to pursue a degree in higher education with that. And while I was in grad school, I was working on a project called SuperDarn, which is still a very active project that uses high-frequency radars to study the ionosphere. And I was looking for ways to actually better connect ham radio to the professional research work I was doing and vice versa. And so that's what really led to all the work that started HamSCI.
So I need to back you up a little bit. How did you get involved with ham radio to begin with? And why did that become the driving force of how you wanted to get your education?
Oh, that's a great question. It all started with scouting. I was a Boy Scout. And every year in October, the third weekend of October, there's an international scout radio event called Jamboree on the Air, or JOTA. And I really didn't know what ham radio was before this, but when I was in, 7th or 8th grade, I went on a camping trip that just happened. It wasn't only a JOTA trip, but they happened to have a ham radio station set up in a cabin in Camp Glen Gray in Mahwah, New Jersey. And Greg Nitkowski, N2BSA, he had just thrown a dipole up in the trees, and he was talking to people all around the world. And it was, we were supposed to be outside that weekend, mostly doing, axes and wood, Paul Bunyan woodsman sort of things. But it was very wet and rainy, so I went in that cabin and I heard that static from the HF radio, and that just kind of set off my curiosity that eventually led me to doing what I'm doing now.
That's a great story. So at what point do you decide that you wanted your professional career to mirror some of that fun you're having at ham radio?
Well, that's another good question. When I was a senior in high school, I was really involved in the band. I was trying to decide between going to music education or into electrical engineering. And I ultimately, when I was a senior in high school, decided to go into music education. And I did that at Montclair State University. But while I was there, I still had my ham radio interest and my scouting interest. So during my summers as an undergraduate student, I would work at Forestburg Scout Reservation in New York. And I started the W2FSR station up there. And they let me teach ham radio and run a technology center that they had. Ken Brockle, WA2FPB, and Dave Fiedler were some of my mentors there. And when I was there, I really decided, I'm like, okay, I really love doing this. I like doing the music too, but I think I want to make this my career. And at that point, Ken, WA2FPB, said, I couldn't just do an electrical engineering major at Montclair State in New Jersey because they didn't have one, but they had a physics degree. He said, well, just, get a physics degree, and then you can do electrical engineering for graduate work. And so that's what I did. I actually double majored in music education and physics, got both majors done, and then I went on and got my master's and PhD in electrical engineering at Virginia Tech.
I'm really enjoying this story, and I'm glad this came up. I thought we were just going to dive into HamSCI and K3LR, but that's a really fascinating story, and I'm glad you shared it with us. So what year did you found HamSCI, and were you still in college at the time?
I was in grad school. So it was in 2015, and we were starting to prepare for the 2017 solar eclipse. And at the time, I really wasn't so familiar with the solar eclipse. But I saw some other students at Virginia Tech, like Magda Moses, and then her advisor, Greg Earl. They wanted to do some studies of the ionosphere with uh, uh, they wanted to do some radio studies of the ionosphere during the solar eclipse. And I had already published a paper which showed that you could use the reverse beacon network to see the effects of the solar flare and a radio blackout. I said, I bet we can do the same thing. We can see the effects of the eclipse in this RBN data, the ham radio data, uh, you, using the RBN. And so from there, we went to Dayton Hamvention in 2015, and we ran around, talked to Ward Silver and Bob McGuire and a few other people. And I said, I think we can kind of create this solar eclipse QSO party. And then I was like, we should really, make a bigger organization or effort out of this. And so that's on the way back. We kind of drafted up all the ideas for HamSCI, wrote them down, and then later that year I created the HamSCI website. I sat in our at our kitchen table during Thanksgiving break when I was supposed to be writing my PhD thesis, and I wrote the HamSCI website instead. and that's what got it started.
So, Nathaniel, I promise you we're going to talk about K3LR and that project in a second, but HamSCI's. So it's been around 10 years. What is the scope today compared to what you maybe envisioned it to be back in 2015? How many people have been involved? How many people are still involved?
Well, I think what's neat is the scope is quite large, and it's really what I envisioned it to be. I started out the front of the HamSCI website today looks very similar to what it did, say 10 years ago. Yeah, and you can see that I defined 3 goals: to advance scientific research and understanding through amateur radio activities, to encourage the development of new technologies to support this research, and to provide educational opportunities for the amateur community and the general public. And so while the Solar Eclipse QSO Party back in 2017 was the first HamSCI project per se, I really tried to structure the website and the group in such a way that it could be expanded to house many projects and kind of be an umbrella collective to host many different things based on people's interests. And I think that's scaled up very nicely since then, because originally we started a Google group. We had maybe 1 to 10 members that we added, a few at a time, and then we opened it up, and now we have over 1,400 members to our Google group, and we have participants from all over the globe that are doing this. We now have multiple different projects. We have the Solar Eclipse QSO Party, which, even though the eclipses are done, the analysis is still taking place. We actually have postdocs that are actually hired just to work on that. We have the Meteor Scatter QSO Party. We've got the Personal Space Weather Station. We have many different universities. I work for the University of Scranton. I'm a professor there. But we also have Case Western Reserve, University of Alabama, NJIT, MIT Haystack Observatory. They're all involved. TAPR is involved. And we've generated over $6 million in federal research funding for these projects over the years. So, and then there's, countless volunteers, like you can see the New England Grape Group up there. So it's I'd say the scope is the same, but boy, it's really grown.
And I see the ARDC logo at the bottom. Have they provided some funding?
Oh, absolutely. So they've provided funding multiple years in a row for our HamSCI workshop, which we have every year. And that's an in-person workshop that we have in March. It's an in-person and hybrid. So we're not making the official announcement on where it is just yet, but planning is underway for the 2026 workshop. And I'm also very glad that they have funded the absolutely beautiful ham radio station we have at the University of Scranton, W2NAF, which you can see at scranton.edu/W3USR. Absolutely gorgeous station. When I first got here, we didn't have any ham radio presence on campus. And now we have a $200,000 station with HF and satellite capabilities and a Skyhawk beam on the roof on the tower, and it's really nice. So that's all thanks to ARDC.
Very exciting. So obviously you're working with researchers around the country. Are you also talking to high school students?
Yeah, we talk to high school students. We have there's a high school student named Isabel, and she's in New Jersey. I can't remember her call sign right off the top of my head. I should, but she and her father they participate in the Meteor Scatter QSO party. We're working on a project right now with the Lackawanna Blind Association, where we're teaching people who are blind and visually impaired ham radio and helping them get their ham radio license. We had a high school student intern participate with us this summer. So I wouldn't say we're very heavily focused on high school students, more on college and graduate students, but we do get some high school students involved as well.
Very impressive stuff, Nathaniel. So let's move on to K3LR. So from what I understand, 4-day project, totally immersive, a lot of hospitality from Tim and his crew, which doesn't surprise me. Tell me about the genesis of that. Who came up with this idea that you should descend upon K3LR and do this massive project?
Tim invited us, so that was a great thing. So we've been working on this personal space weather station project for a couple of years now, and you can see what that looks like over here. Yeah, right over here is the personal space weather station. And we finally come up with this one version of the personal space weather station, which is really software-defined radio-based. And now it can decode whisper spots on all the bands simultaneously and FT8 spots, and it can also make these observations of WWV and CHU and do these Doppler shift observations, and it can simultaneously work as an actual web software-defined radio receiver, SDR, so it can do all these things all at once. And Tim came up to me and said, I really want to have one of those at K3LR. And I said, that would be wonderful. We can make an event out of it. And he agreed. We both kind of had a similar vision there. And so we had a great time where I brought students from the University of Scranton and other faculty and staff and volunteers. And we also had students, faculty, staff from Case Western Reserve University out in Ohio, in Cleveland. There are some of our collaborators. And we met, all met at K3LRs, and we installed the personal space weather station, got it up and running, and then also took the opportunity to have our students share some of the research they've done with that already with Tim and the local DX engineering people. And then Tim gave us a great tour of the station and let our students operate. So it was wonderful.
So Nathaniel, from what I understand in talking to Tim, this location ended up being an ideal location for you, beyond just the hospitality, of course. Tell me about that. What made this particular site so ideal for the work you're doing?
Oh, that's a great question. It really stems from Tim's commitment to being the top contester in the world, and that actually goes far beyond just putting up antennas. A large part of that is also eliminating RF noise and RFI from the property. So a lot of places that you go to these days have a lot of RFI issues because many of the power supplies used to charge cell phones and power many of our everyday consumer electronics are these switching power supplies. And engineers often do not pay attention to what noise they emit on the HF bands, because for most people, it's not an issue. You can make it cheaply, and that little noise on the HF band isn't a problem. Of course, if you're a top world-class contester, this is a big problem. So Tim has gone through with his team to eliminate just about every source of HF radio frequency interference and noise that might affect his contests. And that actually has a really huge benefit to us, because we installed a very simple antenna there. Let's see, we just installed the DX Engineering RSEAV 1. Yeah, here it is. we just installed one of these very simple, modest ground-mounted receive antennas. And at his property, because there's so little noise, it just performs beautifully. And this, what you're looking at right now, is actually the receiver at K3LR streaming over the internet. And you can just see the spectrum. It's nice and flat and clean. And another good way that you can kind of see how well it's performing is if you go to whisper.rocks and they have a top spotters here. You can search for, do Control F for K3LR. Well, right now it's 34. These are the top whisper spotters in the entire world. Right now it's 34. Yesterday it was like, number 16 or 17. And this is just with a very, very modest, simple antenna. Right away it shot all the way up to the top of this board. Whereas some of these other top people here, their systems are connected to much more complicated antenna systems to try to get the same thing. So yeah, the site was just fantastic.
So, speaking of complicated or not complicated, beyond just installing an antenna, there were other work that needed to be done. Tell us about that without going too far into the weeds for us non-science guys.
Oh, the main thing right now is, the personal space weather station system. While it's fully working, it's not the easiest thing to install because it's all a command line Linux and requires a bunch of configuration files to be edited correctly and double checked and things like that. So we spent quite a bit of time. Actually, I spent a lot of time before we got to K3LR making sure the computer was set up correctly. I tested it at my house so that when we got there we could just plug it in. But I think that's the other main work besides setting up the antenna was doing the software configuration. And the software that makes this Whisper Demon personal space weather station run is essentially all written by volunteers. So Rob Robinette AI6VN, he is the main developer of Whisper Demon that pretty much controls all of this. And Phil Karn, KA9Q, he wrote the SDR signal processing code that is the foundation. So Whisper Demon sits on top of that. So these are just amazing pieces of software, but we're still working on, say, the user interface and that part. So that was a lot of the work, just making sure it's configured correctly.
So clearly a lot of hard work went into this project, but I understand you also had some time to do some socializing and had some great hospitality from Tim. You also got on the air. Tell me about that aspect of the trip.
It was absolutely great. So once we got the whole system installed and we're like, okay, it's working, first thing we did was have dinner, which is very important. And so great hospitality there. And not only from Tim, so Tim provided a dinner, and then Gary McKeaton, AF8A, he donated a dinner. And so we had really nice hospitality there. And then after that, we got around and we sat in Tim's living room, and the students actually gave presentations about the research they've been doing with the data from systems that we've installed in other places, and some upcoming work of how we're trying to take this data and actually make it useful for contesters and DXers. So that's where we started there. And then the next morning, Tim gave us a very extensive tour of his antenna system and antenna farm. And his station is absolutely incredible. And, if you don't know anything about ham radio, you can just go on the property and you're like, wow, those are really tall towers and really impressive looking antennas. And they absolutely are. But when you start talking to Tim and you start understanding the engineering and the planning that had to go into all of this, you don't just throw an antenna up on the tower. You need to make sure it's mechanically engineered properly so it doesn't fall over. Not now, not 10 years from now. You need to make sure it's completely safe that way. And then there's so many RF and electrical interactions that you have to engineer for as well. And so getting a tour of all of that just showed the complexity of the system and the detail of thought and effort that went into making this station go. And then in the afternoon, after we had lunch, we actually got to go into the K3LR operating station, and the students got to operate. So Tim had some of his friends who are experienced operators at K3LR, and they sat, side by side with my students and helped coach them to, call CQ and run pile-ups. And here's Katie Campbell, one of Tim's up-and-coming operators, working with my student Nina Torman. Um, you know, it was just such a wonderful experience for my students to be able to operate a world class station and have that coaching, um, right there. And it really lit a fire under my students. And I think they are really engaged to come back to W3USR this semester and get our college station up on the air.
I certainly love that ham radio connection and the passion there. I want to take you back a bit to those presentations that were made in Tim's living room. Can you give me somewhat of a synopsis of what they were presenting?
There were three presentations that were given. So the first one is data. It's a science study from a geomagnetic storm that happened in May 2024. So about a year and a half ago now, there was a large geomagnetic storm, and people may remember that there was aurora coming all the way down to like Pennsylvania and farther south than that, I think maybe even Texas in that May. And we already had a number of personal space weather stations listening to WWV and collecting spots at that time. And we wanted to know how those stations responded to the storm. So these are two undergraduate students, Rebecca Potter, KE2EBI, I think, and then Nina, get her call sign again. I gave them the assignment of, okay, go through all the data and show us what the response to the storm looked like. And they put together a really nice presentation that showed, okay, here's where the geomagnetic storm started. Here is the different. Here's all the different personal space weather stations that were on the air. Here's the amount of Doppler shift each of them are seeing at the different points in the storm. And so that was the first presentation. The second presentation was from Dr. Christina Collins, KD8OXT. She is actually alumnus of Case Western, and she got her PhD funded by the first HamSCI Personal Space Weather Station grant. And she is, one of the things she's doing is working with a program called Open Space, which lets you do 3D visualizations of the data in basically a virtual universe or a simulated universe. And so she talked about how she would like to take some of the personal space weather station data and put it into this environment and have it be useful for both public outreach and also for interesting research perspectives. And then the third is from my student Owen, KD3ALD. He's working on a project that's funded by the Frankfurt Radio Club, the FRC, to develop a contesting and DXing dashboard. And, this is really interesting because usually when I write grant proposals to the National Science Foundation and NASA, I have to write them in such a way where I say, okay, what science questions are we going to answer? How are we whatever we do with this project, how are we going to understand the world around us better? How are we going to answer these science questions? And then in some ways, the amateur radio applications have to come second as broader impacts because, that NSF, NASA, they're trying to fund science. But with a Frankfurt Radio Club project, we were able to say, okay, what can this do for ham radio? And we were able to put that question first. And so Owen is, right now, most of the, you can actually get displays like this if you go to whisper.rocks or whispernet.org or RBN, and you can see maps of where the different stations are talking to. But what we're trying to do with the FRC is develop a visualization of the data that these personal space weather stations are collecting that actually help you to make real-time decisions during contests. Should you be operating this band instead of that band? Should you be pointing your antenna this way instead of that way? And so this project is, it's just in its infancy, but Owen's been working on it since say last March, maybe February. But he's just finished his freshman year. He already has a map up of the data, and he's got plans for having it make some of those decisions. And so he talked about that and showed a demonstration of that.
Very impressive stuff. I want to take you back to the Ham Radio Club there in Scranton. Are you seeing an increase in membership and more college students wanting to get involved with ham radio and that station?
Oh, absolutely. Certainly my research projects have really helped fuel that, because each summer I'm able to create, somewhere between 3 to 6 funded research positions, and my research students often become kind of by default my W2NAF students as well, and vice versa. And that's what's fueled a lot of what has gone on so far. We've really only had the station for about a year and a half so far, so I'm actually just getting to the first round of students. Like Owen he was a freshman last year. His class is the first class where we actually had the station operating from day one when they stepped foot on campus. So this year I'm really excited because we're starting a new effort. I teach a class called Foundations of Physics and Engineering. I teach one section of that. I've got 18 students in it this fall. And my wife also teaches, she teaches 2 sections of that. This year I'm changing the curriculum for it a bit, and I'm actually integrating the technician license material right into the curriculum for that class. So the students, a large part of their grade is going to be based on how well they know that technician license exam material, and then they're going to have to, that's going to be their final exam. So I'll potentially have at least 18 students who are licensed from their first semester on campus. And then, but in addition to just having them know that material, they're going to be required as part of the class to spend, at least 8 hours operating W3USR or participating in W3USR activities like at the local MCOM drills that we have. And then we're also going to be doing some hands-on soldering projects. And, I just saw the RSGB has a little project where you learn to program Python by doing a Morse code project with a microbit. And it turns out we're already using microbits in Python in the class. So I'm going to try to include that project into the class as well. So I think with this new class, I think we're really going to see a big increase in amateur radio activity on campus.
Nathaniel, your energy is contagious, and I have the impression you don't sit with your thoughts very often. There's always another project. But do you have time yourself to get on and operate as a ham radio operator?
I get time here and there. So I do have a station at my house. I'm pretty fortunate. I have a nice ICOM 7610, and now I have I've got a fairly large rural property, so I have some nice wired dipole antennas up, so I can get on and operate, FT8 or phone, and I can do that early in the morning, or I'm trying to get my son interested in it and things like that. And then I've also tried to, where with the W3OSR activities, I'm trying to structure them in such a way that I'm also able to get on the air. So we have a pretty good contest schedule planned this semester, and we have open station hours every Thursday night from 7 to 9 p.m. And I try to save those that time for either it's primarily to get students on the air, but then in that process I also get on the air as well.
And how would people learn more about HamSCI, or specifically if they're young people in high school that might want to intersect ham radio with a career in engineering? How do they learn more?
How do they learn more? I mean, I think the biggest thing is you can go to hamsci.org, and there's a big blue button there that says get involved. You can join our Google group. We have different telecons you can get on. There's instructions on how to build a personal space weather station, um, all of those sorts of things. Sometimes people email HamSCI at hamsci.org. Uh, you can interact with with either me or some of our volunteers that way. You can participate in events like the Meteor Scatter QSO party. I've never operated Meteor Scatter in my life before this Meteor Scatter QSO party. So I learned a tremendous amount from doing that. So, and that's, as I said, we had, a high school student in New Jersey who did that as well. So I was really happy to see that.
Well, Nathaniel, this has been very informative. I really appreciate you taking time today to explain all this to me and my audience.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I really appreciate you having us on your show, and I look forward to talking with you again sometime, and any of your audience members as well. So thank you so much.
My name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED. This has been Q5 Ham Radio. I've been talking to Nathaniel Frissell, W2NAF. You can check out his work at hamsci.org, and I think you should. Thank you in 73.
73.